Paddy has worked extensively in the healthcare sector as a consultant and trusted advisor to the C-suite executives in large global corporations and technology startups. Paddy is the founder and CEO of Damo Consulting, a Chicago-based healthcare growth advisory firm, and also co-founder in NRAY. Did I pronounce it right? Okay, NRAY, a clinical trials startup. Paddy is also the author of the book, The Big Unlock. He's a widely published and quoted writer and thought leader in the healthcare technology markets. And he is an alum of IIT Kharagpur and IIM Calcutta, and has completed the CMI Executive Management Program at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. So please welcome Paddy. And Paddy, if you can introduce the speakers today.
Thank you very much. I hope everybody can hear me. It's my great honor and privilege to introduce my panelists here. Sanjeev Redkar in the middle is a co-founder, president, and CEO of CBT Pharmaceuticals, a biotech company developing oncology combination therapies, harnessing the immune system and targeted molecular pathways. New treatments in the immuno-oncology area have shown some exciting near cures, and CBT plans to bring these novel combination treatments to markets worldwide. Ambuj Singh, on the far left, is a professor of computer science at UC Santa Barbara. He received a BTech from IIT Kharagpur, my alma mater, and a PhD from the University of Texas at Austin. His research interests are broadly in the area of machine learning, network science, and bioinformatics. He has mentored over 40 graduate students and postdocs, including 25 PhD students, and has published around 250 technical papers over his career. He also leads a startup, Acelot.com, that is applying machine learning to the treatment of neurological disorders. And to my immediate left is Mudit Garg, who serves as CEO and co-founder of Qventus, an AI-based decision management platform for hospital operations. In his role at Qventus, Mudit works with some of the top health systems across the country, including academic community and safety net hospitals. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to kick this off with a question for Sanjay, and we're going to bounce back and forth here, and if anyone else on the panel feels like chiming in on one of the questions or even one of the responses, just go ahead and do it. So, Sanjeev, let me start with you. The pharma industry is going through some interesting times, right? Patent cliffs, weak pipeline of drugs, regulatory scrutiny on pricing. Tell us a little bit about the innovations on the therapeutic side, specifically in cancer or in general and broader.
Yeah, thank you, Patty. Good morning, everyone, or almost lunchtime. It's a very interesting question, and I saw this room completely full blockchain, yeah, exactly. And it is substantially reduced, and we need more IITians in innovation in healthcare, seriously, right. Because this has come at a time where the interface between the traditional healthcare and IT has merged so much that it's almost, it's going to boom in the next 5 years. So innovations in healthcare, there are four that I can think of. The first one in cancer or in healthcare is we are able to now harness our own immune system to fight cancers. This is a huge difference because when you're seeing responses, they're very durable, they're very long, unlike chemotherapy and targeted. So these are near cures that you are seeing. And in that area, now we are able to use cell-based therapy to not only cure some cancers in the immune system, but also genetic diseases. This area is going to boom tremendously in the coming years. The second is really IT. The personalized medicine efforts have now yielded such huge amount of concomitant testing, NGS testing, RT-PCR, and these data need to be really analyzed to make some key decisions for physicians, and that's where you will touch base on that area in terms of how do we use that data. The third are going to be novel pricing models. We need that in US. Yeah. And the fourth is in regulatory aspect, how to really bring these novel treatments. And FDA is ahead of this in terms of bringing these novel treatments to the patients.
Yeah. So, I'm going to flip the next question over to Ambuj, and it's a follow-up to what the comments that Sanjeev made. Drug discovery and commercialization is a high-risk, high-cost endeavor. It's about $2.5 billion for a drug, give or take. And your company focuses on the use of machine learning technology for drug discovery and for complex diseases, both in the identification of small molecules and the identification of subpopulations. So can you share how it's working today in healthcare? When are we going to see our first AI drug?
Well, I think the challenge and what lies in this field is that the pace of change in terms of we are reaching the point where we are having lots of weaker senses. So in place of, I think, healthcare in terms of what is happening in the workplace, the next thing that is happening is in place of having very deep data, you'll have a lot of lightweight data sources. And that will allow us to model the state of the human subject or human tissue in a much better way than what is feasible right now. So if you were to take the failures that are happening, let's say in the CNS area, if you were to look at Alzheimer's disease, so there's not been a single success story. Failures every 6 months you hear about a failed drug, which costs billions to develop. Well, I think what is happening here is that we cannot choose the right subjects that are needed for doing the phase 3 trials or the phase 2 trials. And we assume that all the subjects that we have fall into the same group in terms of the disease. Now, with the help of imaging or the help of trying to get to the weak senses, you can build different models for different subjects and you can put them into different groups. So while earlier you had to generate some kind of a p-value and say, will this work for all the subjects? I think no. I think that chances that you'll have a single drug that will work for everyone is small. So you'll have to try to segment that entire larger group into smaller groups. And that can only happen with the help of machine learning AI techniques. So you have to build a model of the human subjects, and you can be using that model to try to select the group for which your therapy is likely to be successful. So I think the advent of these sensors and the weaker forms, so your smartwatch or everything else, is going to help us take us down that specific road.
Right.
And Ambuj, would it be fair to say, it seems like there's also a lot of opportunity for ML to be applied in finding adjacent use cases of drugs that we might have thought could be used for one use case. Feels like a lot of the early AI applications in drug discovery are yielding results in that area.
Yeah, I mean, the success hasn't been achieved yet. I mean, there is a lot of money that is pouring in. But I think with the help of the data and the challenge is that there are these failures happening, but the data about those failures is not being made public. So you want to get more and more of this data. For the ML and AI methods to work, you need to have huge amounts of data.
We'll come back to this whole theme in a minute. I want to switch to Mudit and the work that you do in your company. Your company works in hospital operations, right? So this is the blocking and tackling, day-to-day stuff. This is not deep research, waiting 10 years for a molecule to be discovered or whatever it is. You're in the day-to-day. You're trying to optimize hospital operations. Tell us how that's going. What are you seeing as the opportunities? What are you seeing at a high level?
Yeah, I think first of all, that was an interesting learning for me. I think for many of us, as you guys know, we share backgrounds of not being in healthcare. So for me, that was an accidental learning working in the health systems about 10, 12 years ago across the country and seeing that very, very often it wasn't that the health system didn't have world-class therapies or world-class equipment. It's actually, in spite of knowing what needed to be done, the execution of it reliably and consistently often fell behind. So that's what drove me to the uncool, behind the scenes, the guts of the beast, so to speak, problems in operations. For any of you who've been to a doctor's office or waited in an emergency department wondering what the heck is going on, I think you all know the impact of when those operations don't run as expected. But it's a pretty hard problem, right? Half the people that walk into a hospital are unscheduled. So you have no idea what's going to happen. The resources a patient needs is unknown. You might, when you walk in as a patient, you might stay there for an hour or 2 hours. You could end up staying there sometimes for 10 days, 30 days, even 3 to 6 months. That makes a really challenging environment as well. And on top of that, it's a highly people-driven environment. So you are trying to adjust and adapt to the situation as it's unfolding, but you have to make 10, 15, 20 people change in the moment. So that makes it really hard as a problem. But the applications that are across the board. So for example, what our software is doing is almost acting like an air traffic control in the background, doing what an excellent manager would. If you had a great manager who had all the time in the world, looked around and said, it's looking like the waiting room is really busy, and at this rate, we'll be out of capacity. When they have the time and the energy and the space to do that, they get ahead of those problems. But very often, when it gets bad, they have 50 other things to do. So what our software is doing is saying, hey, it's Monday after Thanksgiving, Dr. Smith's working, he tends to order more labs, and labs are really slow right now. And given how cold it's outside and the patients we already have, we will run out of capacity, and here are 3 things you can do. And it's proactively reaching out to people and helping with those logistical, non-clinical decisions that end up having a sizable impact. That one example of a problem, length of stay, of how much time it takes a patient to walk in, to walk out, the unnecessary waste in that alone is about $40 billion in the US healthcare system only. So that's the kind of problems we've seen work well. But it's also, from an operational standpoint, a challenging set of problems because it's humans involved whose behaviors you're changing.
Right, right. And you make an interesting comment about the size of the problem. We're in the valley where there's a couple of really large tech companies that make a lot of money through advertising, right? It's the ad dollars. And that market is like $50 billion or so. Healthcare is a $3 trillion problem. You just take that in for a minute. It's a $3 trillion, is the size of France, just to put things in perspective. There's plenty of opportunities for fixing things. There's plenty of white spaces for creating new experiences. It's just almost limitless. It
doesn't matter what you do. If you can take a problem and solve it properly, there is a sizable opportunity in healthcare.
That is correct. That is correct. Now, I do want to ask you a follow-up question on that, Mudit. So you've got a piece of software that solves for a particular problem. Similar to your company, there's tons of startups that are developing solutions for specific problems. Right? 2017, the digital health funding was in the $10 billion. That's a lot of money that's going into it. But a lot of these companies struggle to go commercial, to go scale, and then they also have problems with interoperability with other systems in the environment and so on. So what are some of the one or two big challenges that your firm sees as you're trying to create value in the across the spectrum in a hospital operation as opposed to just one single piece? And how do you fit into the big picture? What's your advice for companies like yours trying to build those kinds of solutions?
Yeah, I think the first piece of it is to remember that the machine learning itself, as important as it may seem, or the technology itself, as important as it may seem, is often not enough to make the value from the technology be realized. So the operationalization of that technology in the environment of the delivery of care is one of the most important things. To spend as much time in that, especially as engineers, as exciting as the new technology is, oftentimes that's the first lesson. So for us, early on, when we started predicting some of the unknown variables and telling, for example, in a mother-baby unit, a nurse manager, how many patients will be there at any given hour. Like one day I knew we had nailed it. We told her 26, they were 26. So I went very excitedly. I was like, hey, how did we do yesterday? And she said, I think it was fine. I was like, come on, like I thought you would be a little more excited. Like I know we nailed it exactly. She's like, you're probably right, but I had 5 seconds to look at it. I didn't think of it. What if it was right? What if it was wrong? Should I pull a person in? Should I not? 30% chances, 40%. I didn't have time to think through all that. And that was like really puzzling at first because I was like, 40% of your hospital's cost is in that kind of stuff and you still haven't done anything about it. But then I realized like when you, for example, drive and have high cognitive load, expecting someone to do the cost benefit, to think through things is really hard. So that's the first piece, is don't just sort of stop at the technology piece, but think through all the way. The second piece, specifically for US's healthcare system, I'd say is that the way the money flows in our healthcare system here is kind of funky. It's, it is not direct. And oftentimes many ideas that feel they would make perfect sense to me as a consumer don't work because the way the flow of money is, it is not in the interest of the actor who gains from it to pay for it. So that is a really important fact. So understand how decision is made, understand how money flows in the healthcare environment. It's often deceiving to just look at the problem and say, I would love that. Like I would really like that as a consumer. that often is very hard to monetize and actually build a meaningful product from.
That's a great segue to my next question, actually. We're in the land of 1,000 startups a day. We're in the Bay Area, right? But most of these startups are focusing on solving problems for consumers and for health systems in areas such as patient engagement, care management. These are kind of the core areas of innovation today. In the life sciences space, there is a lot of innovation, but the biggest one that we've seen in the last few years is Theranos, which has flamed out spectacularly. And there's evidence that other companies like Nectar, are also in trouble. To go back to your point, sometimes you kind of go to, clinical trial stage 2 and then you like hit a wall, or, you're not able to go further. And then all of a sudden, you don't have anything. You come up empty-handed. So what are some of the unique challenges for these kind? I'm going to start first on the life sciences and the pharma space, and maybe Sanjeev, you can take that. And then I'm going to flip the same question to you. What are some of the unique challenges that startups in this space are going to have as they go about the process of either disrupting a status quo or creating a new solution? Let's start with you, Sanjeev.
Yeah. The Theranos story was unfortunate, and I think people have moved on. And but I think as a company transitions from private to public, the hype always runs ahead of the data. And same thing happened with Nectar. I was at ASCO. This is a company that is developing a cancer drug in the immuno-oncology space, and they had data in 10, 12 patients initially, and that is not as good in an expanded population. And when hype runs ahead of the data, it's hard. But I think the data are still good. We are looking at near cures, long-term durable responses. It will take time. Cancer is a heterogeneous disease. It is made up of little segments. You mentioned about CNS disorders, Alzheimer's being made up of segments, and we have to attack each segment. So the challenge is in the business side as well as in predictive models. In these some really cell-based therapies, we don't have really animal models that predict. So we need some innovation in the regulatory space to be able to go into, like just last week, Scott Gottlieb, FDA had the Right to Try Act for end-stage patients where the doctor-patient can directly get the drug without involving FDA at all. Some real innovations may help test these new drugs into the market.
If I could make one more point, I think this when you start looking at healthcare and you start working with human subjects, we need to do machine learning not only in terms of assuming that your agents are completely rational, that we assume that we'll do machine learning and we'll do our logical reasoning and we'll assume that humans are perfectly rational agents.
Very good point.
And we have to move away from that model where we understand that humans are boundedly rational agents. And we need to be making those kinds of models from the machine learning end where these models now will be used to understand human behavior. We can't take perfectly rational models and fit that to different human beings that have different risk profiles. You have prospect theory-based ways of trying to model boundedly rational agents, and I think those need to come center place in terms of our machine learning methods.
Yeah. Madhu?
I actually thought that was a really good point, specifically on the fact that the decision-making, at the end of the day, all the insights, if they're not personalized and they don't actually persuade the person to take action, if you don't take the medication, if you don't do these things, there's lots of failure points around the behavioral pieces of it. So I really like that point. The other pieces I'd say, so your question was around challenges. I think one, certainly in the space that I'm in, the systems of record, like if you look at the rest of the technology industry, the systems of record have often been very transparent and easy to get data in and out of. There are some fundamental challenges in that a lot of the data that we deal with within the health system environment actually is human generated, right? It's not machine generated. So some person is saying, you walked in at 9 a.m., I typed your name in, that's a data point. You got a lab, doctor said, order this lab for this person, I typed that in, that's a data point. Now these are human generated, so therefore by their very nature they are also messy. So there's one part is that, which actually ML is more robust than a rule-based system would be in treating that. But the other part is just the friction. It's not a technical problem, just the friction in the getting in and out of the data as well. So I think that's probably two of the challenges that sit there. I think the advice I'd say for people trying to be in the space would be find use cases that no matter what happens in the regulatory environment would make a difference to the person you're selling to. So for example, there's a large amount of change with the ACA. There were some changes with payment models, and for a while, every time anything happened in DC, the health system would stop any investment around that side if there was any uncertainty. So we found the use cases where we're saving costs, we're helping the patient, and the person who's benefiting from it is the health system who's also paying for it, worked well regardless. And there's so many use cases in healthcare where that alignment is existing. So I would say, in general, when possible, try to find those use cases, and you're more likely to be insulated from the changes overall.
There's a follow the money principle.
Right.
And it's an interesting thing in healthcare. Healthcare is, it's not a B2B business, it's not a B2C business, it's a B2B2C business. The person who is paying for care is not the person who is consuming the care. And so because of all these misalignment, and today, everybody talks about value-based care and how we're shifting towards alternate payment models and value-based care and accountability. And so the fact of the matter is that it's only 25% of the overall healthcare dollars that flow through the system that are in any kind of value-based contract. And there's this whole notion of something called a two-canoe syndrome. You go to a hospital system, they're sitting in the fee-for-service world, which is, you print the invoice, you go in for an MRI or blood test or whatever it is, you send an invoice and you get paid for it. And on the other side, you have a population health management group, which is saying, no, we don't want to do that. What we really want to do is get a chunk of money to manage a population, and we'll drive efficiencies and keep the difference. But these two are at odds with one another. So that's on the business model. There's a fundamental business model problem for startups that are trying to go in. They didn't need to really understand where the money is coming from. And you talked about the interoperability challenges with multiple systems. You didn't mention the systems of record by name, but everybody knows Epic, Cerner. They're not, these are very, very dominant systems. If you want to play in healthcare, you have to know how to play with these companies. Otherwise, you could have a real problem.
Absolutely.
Which, with that, I want to switch to the question of data, right? Everybody around the table here is working with data and, all the AI and ML and so on. It's all predicated upon very large volumes of data. But now we are looking at very diverse sources of data. We have gone past the structure. It's not that long ago that healthcare was all on paper. It's not that long ago.
Right.
It's like 10 years.
Right.
And now everything is digitized, but that's just table stakes. Right now, we're in this data explosion where we've got all kinds of data, patient-generated health data, wearables, sensors, genomics data, social determinants, et cetera, et cetera. How does all of this come together? What does it need for what does it take for somebody to make sense of all of this? How do you really wrap your arms around it? How do you deal with the regulatory and privacy concerns around it? And how do you really build a business model that sits on top of it? Anybody want to take that first?
I worked at a company, Otsuka.
Yeah.
Otsuka got the first pill in the CNS, Abilify. What they did was they got, there's a sensor inside the pill with a patch to make sure that patients that have schizophrenia, a caregiver can know exactly when the pill goes in. So that was the first time, that was a huge regulatory challenge to get the therapeutics and this wearable design specification approved. It's on the rise, and the good part is, FDA is on top of it. It is engaging people, getting people to understand the challenges that are involved in this. And then they're also dividing their divisions up really well. But it remains, we need, as you said, use cases, similar drugs like these that are using both ends into the market, and that way we'll learn as to how do you get these approved.
I want to touch on regulation, right? Based on your experience, do you see regulation changing for the better? Is it the same? What changes have you seen, and what does it mean for people out here who are looking to start a new company, for instance? There's no getting around regulation, by the way.
Right.
For those who are thinking, you have to deal with it. And people have tried and failed. There's lots of corpses on the 101 of companies that tried to get around regulation, got burned. So what are you folks seeing as far as the regulatory environment is concerned?
So I think, I mean, of course, from a data standpoint, just there's a whole set of regulation around how data is used, how it is stored, how privacy of that data is guaranteed. Unfortunately, I would say they're not specific, they are sort of guidelines. So there's a lot of interpretation that is around there. I think over the course of time, though, now compared to like 5, 6 years ago, there is a lot more infrastructure available that is, for example, AWS, Google Cloud, all of them have a fair amount of services that are HIPAA compliant that takes a bunch of that, a bunch of at least the lowest level of that compliance into account. Now, of course, your own software, your own practices have still to be compliant from that standpoint. The other part, I think, from a regulation standpoint that is uncertain, but there's a lot of active dialogue right now with the FDA going on is we've traditionally regulated systems that were somewhat static, right? You had a rule of some sort, or you had a precise sort of mix of chemistry that did something precisely. How do you regulate something that is changing, right? That's an algorithm that's changing all the time, and that's learning. That's much harder. And what's hard about it is not just the algorithm, it's actually you kind of will have to submit the data and the algorithm for really to be able to always learn and see how it would behave. And that's actually an interesting challenge in how the regulation will have to evolve to manage ML-related or statistically related, not sort of deterministic methods of changing things. I think so that there is a lot of interesting work happening around that, which I think is an area of change in the regulation that I see coming.
Yeah, I think I would like to add to the fact about the data being dynamic. I think in the case of the complex diseases, you almost have to deal with data that has been collected over time. Any snapshot isn't going to be useful for you because there are multiple pathways. You have to try to understand which pathway has been active in the past, which pathway is active right now. So you have to collect data. It might be partial, and it has to be collected over time. So you need sensors where this data will be stored, and this has to outlive the length of a specific system where it is being collected, where it is being stored. There has to be some notion that these data over someone's lifetime can be handed from one system onto the next system because it is useful. And there's also the sense that we have to understand that when you have a disease, you need to have it solved not only because it matters to you, but also it matters to everyone else. And I think that sense that what is of benefit to you is a part of the social good also, that it benefits everyone else.
Sanjeev, in your world, is your pipeline accelerating? Is the regulatory environment helping you accelerate your processes?
Absolutely. I mean, I especially after Scott Gottlieb, who was actually in the industry before, he has really dynamically changed the outlook. Now, long term, we'll see whether it is good or bad. How does it affect the payer systems and the healthcare cost? But clearly, you're seeing if you have a meaningful clinical benefit in a small patient population, you'll get drug approval.
That's
50 people, phase 2 extended getting approval, if you are seeing an effect in 75% of patients. The problem with cancer has been incremental, so you see an effect in 20%, and then you seek approval. That's not the best.
I agree with you. I think, again, the FDA has been doing some remarkable things, like the pre-cert program that they just brought about for software as a medical device, for those of you who don't know it. I mean, it's a way for you to get your software development process approved. You don't have to have a product, just get your process approved. And if if they think that you have hygienic processes, they let you develop and they let you put stuff out there, and if you want to make incremental changes to your product, you don't have to keep going back for approval. You just put it out there in the market.
That's, I think, the solution to the ML-driven way of, you can't test for the exact thing. You can test for the hygiene.
Yeah.
You can test for how you develop and such,
Last question before we open it up for questions. So we've talked mostly about technology-led innovation. We talked about ML, AI, and stuff like that. But innovation in healthcare is happening in multiple ways. Healthcare delivery models themselves are changing. Healthcare is an industry under tremendous transformation right now. We're seeing the inpatient model shifting to outpatient and the outpatient model shifting to home care models. There's a fundamental shift taking place because the economics of the business is making it very hard to continue to sustain yourself and build more and more hospitals. So it's all getting more and more virtualized. So that's one example of how it's getting. And then now we've got new, potentially transformative technologies like CRISPR, right? Gene editing, which it's not to do with information technology per se, but it's a breakthrough.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the most transformative things that you see today that you think is going to make a big difference, huge difference in the next 5 to 10 years?
I mean, first I'll just say, like, there are a lot of them. So if anyone has any interest, it's a really, really good time to jump into healthcare because there is so much change happening and at a pace that hasn't happened before. I think you mentioned a lot of them, but I think chief among them in my mind is there is a strong willingness to change and people realize that the current system is not going to scale. Whether that is coming in form of retail clinics, it's coming in form of employers taking things in their own hands for healthcare. On the business side, I think on the medication side, personalized medicine side, discovery, I probably can't name enough, but I feel like the bottom line for me would be if you have interest to find a big market, make a difference, and do something that actually also has social good, it's a really, really good time to be in healthcare.
Quick 30 seconds, both of you.
So my sense is that we'll eventually reach the point where the people that know enough will make the right decisions. And I think some of us will also have to convince the people that don't know. I mean, they are being left outside the main domain of people who are out here. How do you actually go and take this knowledge and what is happening to the segments of society that is not in the know-how? I think people here will find out and they will adapt and they will be healthy. But to have an impact, some of this has to be translated. And I don't know whether that will be happening through companies or through other ways.
Sanjeev.
Yeah, concur with you. I mean, here you saw the merger or between Amazon, J.P. Morgan, and a retail pharmacy,
Berkshire Hathaway.
Berkshire Hathaway, coming together. This delivery system has to change.
Yeah.
As you said, Mudit, it is unsustainable, and home healthcare delivery. So these are two things that are going to dynamically change in the coming years.
Fantastic. We have time for a couple of questions if anybody wants to step up to the microphone right here for the panelists. Yeah.
Hi, this is Amrish from IIT Delhi. So I had a question for a panel. How did you go about identifying the problem to solve when you started your companies?
That's a really good question. I think that is in many ways the hardest thing is how do you understand the problem at a deep level. For me, it was accidental, as I said. I was actually at a consulting firm working with hospitals, and I was like, what the heck is going on inside here? There's something needs to change. And worked on that problem, understood how people made decisions, understood how data systems worked through that process, and then actually spent a fair amount the first 2 years of the company trying things that didn't work. So I think, but I think I don't have a, short of saying find experts to work with or find places in how you can get exposed to the setting, that'd be probably my advice to you.
Yeah, I think that seems like a similar story. I worked 25 years in oncology, saw how things were done, saw room for improvement, and at the right opportunity, I was in the cancer oncology field, and clearly there is an unmet medical need, and then kind of jumped at the right opportunity when the ecosystem was right, started my own company.
For me, it was just based upon trying to make a different kind of an impact. Going beyond just writing papers to see if you can have an impact through finding a new cure.
Well, we have time only for one more question, unfortunately. So please go ahead, sir.
So
Thank you. This is Sohag Desai from IIT Bombay. You all spoke a lot about problems and innovations that apply to those problems after the fact of illness and maybe once patients enter the hospital and so on. Could you speak also to the innovations that are taking place in the wellness space, and, food, nutrition, and diagnostics and such areas that help avoid illness in the first place?
Wellness and prevention. Yeah. Anybody want to take that?
There's a bunch of really interesting ones actually that are happening now. I think on the diabetes management space, there's like Amada and a bunch of digital therapeutics as a space where people are using coaching and using nutrition and using other ways of helping arrest the progression of the disease. There's another one, Vorta, recently, which is actually for pre-diabetics through diet, but matching diet through data with the right person is able to arrest the development of diabetes itself. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening in that space. One of the reasons I think oftentimes you will see solutions bias more to this side is the amount of data available post-illness is often a lot higher than the amount of data available before. But through sensors, through sequencing, through other things, now that is changing. So I think hopefully more of that will be enabled over time.
Yeah, I think it just boils down to having lots of cheap sensors. I think if once the sensors that you have become cheap and more people can actually use them, that will just drive this entire segment where you can use those sensors to be modeling data and the health of the human subject.
Well, healthcare is definitely moving towards prevention. So thank you.
Sorry.
Yeah, yeah. There is an effort in the area. The only thing is it's harder to get drugs or agents approved in that area. So they fall in the nutritional, as you exactly said. But we really need to think that needs to be more, especially even in the cancer side. I wonder, we talk about, oh yeah, you go on drugs, but what about your lifestyle? There is also a lot of changes you can make in your lifestyle that will in fact determine what your outcome is. And we are not monitoring that. Even in my trials, what the person is doing at home. And there are a lot of publications. UCSF has a center that has a lot of research going on. Unfortunately, because we run these randomized trials, we just need to kind of do it in a small population and give them a regimented approach. And so you can, but these, I want them to grow, but I don't have a clear solution how.
Thank you. Let's give a big round of applause to our speakers. That was really informative. Thank you so much.